What does it take to make workshops work? And how can we facilitate collaboration that sticks and leads to results? My name is Miriam Hartness, and with the Workshops Work podcast, I'm on the mission to find the magic ingredients that make workshops work. Today with me on the show is Joyce Matthews, and we speak about andragogy and about leadership, how adults learn and how we facilitate adult learning. So stay tuned. And by the way, if you want to support the show and so that it can remain free and accessible, why don't you consider a small donation via workshops.work/support. And if you don't have pen and paper at hand to take your own notes, scroll down to the show notes to get your free one-page summary. And now, enjoy the show. Hello, Joyce. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Hello, Miriam. Good to be here.
Yes, I'm looking forward. We've been circling around each other on LinkedIn for quite a while already.
We definitely have, yes. And listening to your podcasts and following your posts and lots of interesting stuff going on there.
Yeah. And I'm looking forward to learn more about your work and the concept of andragogy.
Yeah. And I'm looking forward to learning more about it too.
And before we're getting there, I always start with the same question. When did you start calling yourself a facilitator? And actually, do you?
Yes, I do. And I started calling myself a facilitator in, I think it was probably May 2011 when I got the certificate. I got the certificate that said Facilitator of Leadership Development. So the story behind that was I was trained at the National College for School Leadership in Nottingham, which it doesn't exist anymore. And we went through a very rigorous 5-day training programme. Then a couple of weeks later, we were assessed. And then a couple of months later, we were quality assured. And finally, if you pass all that, you get the certificate. So, yes, I call myself facilitator because I've got the piece of paper.
How much has changed in your mindset and your skill set since the piece of paper?
Oh, a huge amount. I think when I got it, I really still did not understand the whole concept of it. It's like passing a driving test, isn't it? You pass the test and then you learn to drive. So I'd done the training, I've done the assessment, the quality assurance, and then you start to learn to really facilitate. And the more you work with other facilitators, the more you learn about yourself and facilitation, the more tips you pick up. I was very, very fortunate that I worked with some very experienced old heads. And we co-facilitated everything, but there was always a team of 4. So you'd be watching 2, and 2 would be sitting on the sideline waiting for your bit and just picking up so much, just absorbing it, just being in the room with them was fabulous.
And I love that you say that you learned most from co-facilitating and observing them, and that you learn most about yourself.
Yes.
I totally relate to that. The biggest part of facilitation is the bits and pieces about ourselves.
Absolutely.
And to handle situations. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is, so the whole core of our program was based on emotional intelligence.
Oh, wow.
And so it is all about yourself, because the other quadrants can't come in until you learn about yourself and self-awareness. So that's also what my program is based on, because that's what I learned.
Yeah, and I also believe that when we speak about leadership, it's about this self-awareness. And I think it was Juanita Robertson who on the podcast said, you cannot guide a group where you haven't been yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So in a leadership course, when it's about self-awareness and showing up as a role model, you need to practice that yourself first, right?
Yes, absolutely. And the skills of emotional intelligence are facilitation. So emotional intelligence is the theory and the concept, but the practical skills are facilitation.
Can you explain more about that before I assume to understand?
Yes. So when I'm training facilitators of andragogy, I have a competency framework that we follow. And the competencies are within the 4 quadrants of emotional intelligence. So, for example, a competency of empathy. Now, empathy is one of those great nominalization words where I say it, I know what I mean, You might be thinking something different. Everybody else in the room is thinking something completely different because it's a concept. So how do you do empathy? And that's what I teach on the Facilitator of Andragogy program. The skills of how you do empathy. How do you do self-awareness? How do you do accurate self-assessment, emotional self-awareness, self-confidence? How do you do it? What are the skills?
I love that, especially because empathy, I think before even thinking of how do we do that, what does it actually really mean?
Yeah. And it is a huge concept. And so many people, somebody will say, oh, it's walking in someone else's shoes. Somebody else will say, oh, it's just feeling how they might feel. It's all of that. And how do you do it?
And if there was just one nugget that you could share with us, knowing that obviously you have an entire course about it, what would that be? So how do we do empathy?
Well, I might read you from, so I have 4 levels. So foundation is the basic, and then effective, highly effective, and outstanding. So the foundation level for empathy is accurately listens and takes careful notes of what is said to develop understanding. So basically the Stephen Covey phrase, seek first to understand. So that's the first level of empathy.
And then if I understand correctly, the first level of empathy even breaks down into other skills like listening.
Yes, absolutely. And there's another great one on here, non-possessive warmth. So they're all tied together. We can extrapolate them. And I think this is where my PE background comes in. To teach a skill, you have to first identify the very, very discrete skill. So you're absolutely right. So it might be right down to its communication, but what form of communication? Is it choosing words? What words? So it's identifying that absolutely discrete skill, breaking it right down minutely, and then building it back up until you get to a position where you can stress it, you can put it into an overload position so that you know you won't be hijacked when you're stressed and you're under pressure.
Because it's basically, if I follow along what you said, that you learned that as a PE teacher, so it's kind of building muscle memories. So if we really understand it, then it's like it's so deeply ingrained in us that we won't forget, even if is this what you mean?
That's absolutely what I mean, yes. And if you practice progressively, so if whoever has designed the program develops the practice of the skill progressively and developmentally, like a hockey skill. So for example, if you're learning a push pass, you would do it 1-on-1. Then you build it up maybe 2-on-1, then maybe 3v2. Then you put it in much more complex and more stressed situations. So the skill is built up developmentally. And as you say, as you're doing it, you're building up the understanding, the muscle memory, the competency, so that by the time you get to that game situation, you do it without even thinking.
And this then also means that you really need to design the container in which you can actually practice the skill.
Yes.
And also observe. I think that's also the same in sports, right?
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
we underestimate the impact of observing other sports people in doing the movement.
Yeah. And so quite often when I'm doing the training program, I'll say, I'm training now, I'm facilitating now. So do you notice the difference? Because some skills I have to train, but then when you get up to do the skill is a facilitation skill. So we flip in and out, and it's the metacognition of, what am I doing now? Am I training you? Am I facilitating?
Where would you draw the line? Can you give examples?
Oh, I think facilitation skills actually have to be trained. So this is what I'm thinking in my head, where I'm drawing the line. I can remember once when I was training to be a PE teacher, facilitation it can be a form of teaching. And I can remember we tried and we experimented. What can you facilitate? Can you facilitate creative dance? Can you facilitate gymnastic sequences? And you can do all that as long as you've got the basic movement. The lecturer we had at the time pushed it and said, can you facilitate somebody learning the javelin? Now, that scares the life out of me because javelins can kill. And it's a wee bit like facilitation skills. There are some that if you don't use them properly are actually harmful. Psychologically, they'll damage people. They'll put them in a scary place. Their defences will come up. They might be verbally abusive. They might just shut down. So there are times when You have to just train the facilitation skill, and train it, and then say, okay, you've got that skill. Now you can go and practice it. So there are facilitation skills you can't just facilitate. Let's just have a wee try at this. It's, these things are too open. Here's a javelin. Off you go and have a wee throw. Too dangerous.
So if I understand correctly, then the facilitation is basically giving them the space to figure it out themselves?
So a lot of the facilitation we do, it's the knowledge and understanding behind the skill.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll set them off in activities and we'll go and research, we'll come back, they'll maybe do a wee bit of presentation, we'll then debrief. So how did I do that? Okay, you saw me do that. What decisions did I let you make on it? Okay, so you've done all that. You've all come up with different understanding. We've got a shared group understanding now. So how do you do that? And they'll then try to break it down. And everything that I'll ask them to break down, I'll say, I'm demonstrating all the time. So step back, metacognition. What have you seen me do? What have I asked you to do? What is that skill? So you're absolutely right. Demonstration is worth more than 1,000 words or pages or handouts or links in a computer. How did I do that? What did I do that made you feel that way? What did I do that helped you to understand that? We've got it. Okay. So I'm now going to set up a practice where you can practice that yourself.
Yeah. I try to, because it's all the differentiations are so fluid between the trainer and the facilitator and then the teacher maybe.
I'm not to teach anymore. I'm bored with the sound of my own voice. Too many years shouting from the side of a pitch.
If you would go back now to your life as a teacher, applying your facilitation skills or training skills, what would be different?
I don't actually think anything would be different because I think how I learned to teach and the way I experimented with my teaching led me to facilitation. I was very, very fortunate that the last school I taught in was a private girls' boarding school. So you could do anything. So I basically experimented with how many different ways can you teach a forward roll? Okay, I can do it that way, I can do it that way. Can I facilitate it? Can I do it that way? And the whole reason I left that school was I really felt I had nowhere else to go. I'd experimented so much that what else do you do? I found 15 different ways to teach a forward roll. Are there any more?
And I have to ask one more time, the difference between training and facilitating in your context.
Training for me is much more about skills. If you have to learn a skill, training's a really good way to do it, an effective way to do it. If you're learning about knowledge and understanding and context and application of skills, facilitation is an effective way to do that. So when you had Romy on talking about experiential learning, so if we break down the experiential learning to the 4 quadrants, the 1 quadrant, the how-to, the skill, that's good for training. The other 3 quadrants are great for facilitation. In my...
Okay.
Yeah.
So facilitation, the self-awareness or the self-reflection piece, the looking inside for answers.
But even looking outside to find... So the thing about andragogy, which is different from process facilitation, is that at some point we bring in content. And so rather than me being the teacher and the sage on the stage and saying, this is what I'm going to tell you, blah, 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 here's 100 handouts, I use facilitation to introduce that. Oh, yeah.
Okay. Okay. And so Andragogy has been your hashtag, I would say, for the last decade?
Probably. I flip backwards and forwards because I often go through that phase of what do I actually do?
So what is then the difference between andragogy and training?
Andragogy, well, training can be done with andragogy in mind. So the definition of andragogy, there's a definition and there's a translation. The definition is adult learning. The translation is from the Greek, andra, meaning man, as in human, and agogos, goji, meaning to lead. So the translation is man leading man. So it's about adults leading adults. So
which has an eye level.
Yes, absolutely. So you can still train using andragogy and using the assumptions of andragogy and applying them, it's a theory, it's a concept, it's an understanding, it's how you apply it to your design.
And when you say that you can apply the principles, can you give us maybe a one-on-one on andragogy?
Mm-hmm.
And then I would be curious, why is this term not wider used? Although it seems as many might do it unconsciously.
Yes, absolutely. And facilitators do it unconsciously.
Mm-hmm.
So this is how I would facilitate andragogy. And you can go and find out this yourself. So Malcolm Knowles, Alexander Kapp. Malcolm Knowles is the most recent one from the 70s. Alexander Kapp, German from the 1800s. They used this word and this concept, and they postulated that there's assumptions of andragogy. So presuppositions, that if we have these presuppositions in our mind, that these adults sitting in front of us learn more effectively if we take this in mind. So it's things like self-concept, readiness, internal motivation, adults like problem orientation, take into account past experience. This, to me, is the biggest difference between pedagogy, teaching children, leading children. The translation is leading children, and andragogy, leading man. Adults have baggage. We have experience. Children have experiences, but not so much.
Yeah. Brings back to mind my conversation with Romy that you cited earlier with the empty and the full cup.
Yes.
So when we're in a room with adults, we can assume that all of our cups are already full.
Absolutely.
So we cannot just pour more content in the cups.
Yes, and every single one is unique and different, and we'll never know their experiences, their knowledge, their skills, their understanding. We'll never know that, no matter how much time we spend with them. So being aware of that before you go even into the room and designing with that in mind is quite different. Especially if it's in a foreign country like China, where you can't even understand what they write in the post-its.
Yes. And before digging deeper into that, I just want to honor the concept of humility that comes with it. That I think one part of the training business is the acknowledgement, or the imposter syndrome, maybe, that I would assume all of us carry around. Being afraid that we are a fraud, we don't know enough. Maybe those in the audience know better. But then coming into the space, acknowledging that they know already a lot and that we still can add something, I think is a beautiful place to start with.
Yes. And I also have a theory about imposter syndrome.
Tell me.
I don't think it's a syndrome. I think it's a stage of learning that we all go through. So when you become consciously incompetent, when you know you're not very good at something and it's a wee bit uncomfortable, I think that's what people then call, it's imposter syndrome. I don't think I know enough. I don't think I'm good enough. Or is it just that you've got the stage where you think, I'm learning, but have I learned enough? Can I do it well enough? And I'm still that person on a hockey pitch 45 seasons in, when I'm trying to learn to do a tomahawk, and the 17-year-olds are amazing at it. And it's uncomfortable. I'm not an imposter. I'm just learning, and I'm not very good yet, but I'm conscious that I'm incompetent.
I love that. And to add to this, I think you do need quite a degree of knowledge to even acknowledge that you don't know everything and that there's still things to learn. So this conscious incompetence.
Yes.
So if you doubt, or if you have the impression that you have an imposter syndrome, actually it shows that you have reached a level where you know what you don't know, which is quite sophisticated.
Yes. And self-awareness, back to emotional intelligence, it all comes back to self-awareness.
Yeah. Which then means that facilitators and trainers or facilitators have a higher likelihood to suffer from imposter syndrome because they have more self-awareness and hence they are more aware of what they don't know.
Yes. And I think also a lot of facilitators are so unconsciously competent, they're not even aware of how good they are and what they're doing.
Because we rarely get the opportunity to actually share it, because we always trust that the knowledge is in the room and it's only our duty to bring that forth and to design the process.
Yeah.
Which then brings us back to andragogy, which is more than just process facilitation, but the facilitation of knowledge.
Yes, there's always some sort of content in there because it's man leading man, but it's adult learning as well. So that's the concept I use it for, adult learning. If you take it in its truest form, man leading man, it's just essentially it's skills of a leader. So how do you do that? How do you, for me, it really starts with the belief. What do you believe a leader's role is? I believe a leader is there to develop other leaders.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I do what I do. If somebody believes differently, then maybe andragogy is not for them. If they believe it's about command and control, then andragogy is not for them. They're more going down the pedagogy line and treating the adults like children. And we all know there's lots of leaders like that.
Yeah. So there's meeting each other as equals and on eye level.
Yeah.
And still, if you come in as a trainer using andragogy, there is still the difference between the trainer and the group. And I wonder, are there contexts where facilitating with andragogy makes more sense than in others, as opposed to process facilitation or experiential learning? If there is a difference actually to andragogy, maybe it overlaps.
There isn't. My design is based on experiential learning, so I probably use the same design as Romy. And it was very interesting when she talked about, I have my own design template. Well, I have mine too. It's based on an experiential learning template, but I dare say we've both tweaked it slightly and we know what works for us. So andragogy is based on experiential learning because andragogy is based on how adults understand, learn, experience and feel. It's not rocket science. And you're right, why aren't more people learning about this? And I think it might be because of this imposter syndrome, this consciously incompetent. As soon as people start to learn about it, they realise they don't know about it and they get frightened and they're scared because it's a wee bit uncomfortable. And that's what deep, profound learning is. It is uncomfortable because you're shifting not just your mind, but your physical skills, your body, possibly your beliefs and values, taking them a place they've not been for a long time. And it is shaky because you're shifting everything.
Yeah, true.
I did a training course a couple of years ago for some school principals in Scotland, and they were very experienced principals, and they came along to train as facilitators. And there was it's mostly women, but you get the odd man that wants to be a facilitator. And he came along and he said, been in this game for years, seen it all, done it all, bored stiff with conferences, keynote speeches, all the rest of it. I don't think there's anything you can show me, Joyce. And at the end of it, he said, I genuinely thought I knew it all, and you have blown my mind. And he said, why didn't I know about this years ago?
Do you recall what element it was that?
It was the concept of andragogy, and then how you use it, the skills to use it, and then how you apply it. As part of the programme, whoever's in the cohort of participants, I asked them with each skill that we use, where do you think you could use this? Oh, I could use this in a teacher review meeting. Okay, where do you think you could use? Oh, I could use this when I meet with parents. So it's things that they've been doing day in, day out, and it's relevant to them, but they've never thought to learn the skills to do it.
So if I understand it correctly, then it's basically not only teaching new skills, but looking at what they already have acquired in their professional lives, even maybe in their private lives, and then see how they can repurpose the skill in the context of their profession or the training.
That is it, exactly. And I often say this to them, you are pedagogy experts. Andragogy is a slide along the teaching spectrum. So it absolutely is the skills that you've got. How can we take them to a different level with adults rather than children? And it is just a slide, and we do the spectrum and we draw it, and we We discuss where coaching goes and lecturing goes and keynote speeches and all the rest of it. And when they see it visually, I think that does blow their minds, some of them.
And to what extent, you mentioned earlier about the assumptions on which you based the training. And if I recall correctly, it was about everyone coming in with an open mind, everyone being there to learn, to question.
That's not one of the assumptions.
Okay, great. Please remind me.
Yeah, for me, so there's, depending on when the listeners put into their search engine Andragogy, you'll get different numbers of assumptions, 5 or 7. I quite often say to the trainee facilitators, so which assumption do you think is the most important? If you had to prioritise and rank them, which do you think is the most important? And often they will say it's relevance. That's the most important thing to learning, to adult learning. If I don't need to know this, why am I bothered? Why am I sitting here? If I don't need to know this. So often people come in with a closed mind. Why do I need to learn this? I don't need to learn this. I've been a successful head teacher for 20 years. Why do I need to do this? So as a facilitator of Andragogy, my first job and the first part of my design is to extrapolate the relevance for them. So to get them to find out why they want to be there and why it's in their interest to learn about this, so that I trigger their intrinsic motivation. Because Andragogy is all about intrinsic motivation, pedagogy, children, extrinsic motivation. You'll sit in that school, that seat and learn because you've got an exam to sit.
Yes. Yeah. And once we're intrinsically motivated, of course, we are curious, we have an open mind, and we want to learn. And if I understand correctly, you mainly train teachers?
Mainly because I was a teacher and I know the market. Back to the empathy thing, I know how teachers feel. I know how I felt when somebody said, go on a training course. Really? I've got childcare. Do I have to? It's the end of a long day. Why would I want to do that? So I am quite tuned in to that market. I've also done sports teams and high-level sports teams, racing, ski teams, things like that. So,
because I'm curious on 2 levels, actually. One level is, what is the mindset shift of the teachers that they will then bring back? So what is shifting for the teachers before and after in the impact of their classes? And maybe before that, does it mean that andragogy can also be applied to formal education, where it is usually not adult? Well, depends on what age you would consider a teenager an adult.
Yes. So the second part of your question, I have done work in schools with teachers who deal with older students, 16 plus, but also refugees who have a lot of baggage, a lot of experience. So andragogy is very good when you've got children who have a lot of trauma, a lot of different experiences, come from different countries that you haven't got experience of. Normally, I wouldn't work with teachers that work with pupils. Normally, I work with teachers that lead other teachers.
Okay.
So middle leaders, assistant principals, system leaders. It's adults leading adults.
Okay, now I understand. And then I can also see the complexity or the need, because I always say that facilitating facilitators is like herding cats.
Yes.
Teaching teachers.
They're the worst pupils. I'm probably the worst one, because if you don't get me at the start, not only will I switch off, I will disrupt. I will ruin your session if you don't get me at the start. So I know what I'm like, and I'm the worst person you can have in your session.
Which is great to know, because then you're very aware in the design of your own session.
Yes.
I'm also one of the bad participants, I must admit.
Yeah. And I also remember from one of my training sessions when I was a trainer of PE teachers, before I knew about facilitation and andragogy, I once had a man come into my session, and it was an after-school session. I think it was hockey or football or something like that. He wasn't getting changed. He was sitting in his suit. He wasn't participating, and he sat and read a newspaper for 2 hours. So I have experience of people who do not have intrinsic motivation. Yeah. And I don't ever want that to happen again.
And you would then just leave him respecting their decision?
Because I didn't know about andragogy and I didn't know the design, knowing now what I know and having the skills that I have, that would never have happened. So a very simple fix for that. There's two very simple fixes. One, I refuse to run professional development sessions after school because the professionals have done a full day's work. There is no other profession you would say, you've done a full shift, being a policeman or an ambulance driver or a banking professional, come and do some professional development after that. You wouldn't do it. So I refuse to do that because I don't think it's professional or a nice way to treat adults. It's not good. Sure. So that's the first thing. And the second thing, I often tease schools with this. What if you made all meetings and all professional development optional? So you got the intrinsic motivation. What would happen then? What if you did that?
And then it can be tricky, right? Because I can imagine that. So the way how I imagine it from what you explain is that you would spend the first bit of the training really pulling out the intrinsic motivation. So why would you care? How can you apply it? In what areas to really open their minds and empty a little bit of their cups so that they can add. So if it's fully optional, where is the moment where you can actually spark this curiosity, where you can have them together and make them think about their application?
So that comes, well, it can be at the start. It can be when you're teasing out the intrinsic motivation. I have a technique where I basically create a tension. Mm-hmm. What happens if you don't do this? What's the worst case scenario? Mm-hmm. And then what happens if you do? So that creates a great tension, and I get them to generate their own learning agenda based on that tension. So what is it you specifically need to know about this? So they set their own learning agenda for the session at that very starting point, so that they're already identifying that they need to know something, that there's a need, there's a relevance, and this is a specific thing. Now, subconsciously, they've set the driver for where their attention's going to go for the rest of the whole session. So when I then introduce the knowledge or the concept, and it might be something as dry as a bone as a school policy, which, by the way, I don't need to read because I don't need to know the content. I'm clean. Their subconscious will go exactly where it needs to go in that policy. And then we move on to the skills, and then we move on to, okay, so where will you apply this? With whom? To what standard? When? And we drill right down to specifics so we can get the game practice absolutely spot on.
Yeah. And then all you need is the initial self-awareness, a small piece of self-awareness that if they just continued the same way as they've already done, something might be missing.
Yeah, they'll get what they've already got. Yeah. They'll feel the way they're already feeling. They'll come in as usual and sit with their arms folded and go, well, I don't have to. It'll be the same if you keep doing that. Yeah. Let's actually think what you might get out of this that is useful to you.
Yeah. And I like this tension creation also with clients. What would be the outcome if you didn't have the workshop?
Absolutely. Yeah. I once went on a workshop when I was learning to facilitate very early on, and it was when I was living in Newcastle upon Tyne, which is the north of England, and I'd got the train up to Edinburgh for this course. Went in, did all the nice meetings, signed in the register. We all sat down, and the lady said, I've signed all your certificates, here you are. Now, if you'd like to go shopping, feel free. You've got your certificate, you don't have to stay. I thought long and hard. I thought, oh, are you in Edinburgh? Oh, I actually like to go shopping, but I've actually come to learn and I want to stay in this course. And I thought it was a great, clever thing to do, clever technique, because you're giving people the option there. You don't have to stay. You've got a certificate, off you go if you want. Only you're losing out, and I'll have the right people in the room. And,
and you create the fear of missing out.
Yes,
because suddenly I think it's especially those complainers that we do have in trainings and workshops who, I would have used my time differently and there's so many things, I'm so busy, and then once you give them agency, like, okay, go.
Yeah.
Then suddenly They're like, oh, what is there to miss?
Exactly. I might just stay.
Yeah. Why are they keeping it all to themselves?
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. And then it's just models the belief that everyone is self-responsible and it's based on intrinsic motivation. That's how we learn.
Yeah. You're an adult. I'm going to treat you as an adult. If you don't want to be here, don't be here. If you've been sent here, you don't have to stay. Off you go. Have a nice day.
I tried something similar once when I heard that I was hosting a training on how to have better meetings with a room full of academics. And just before starting, I heard the rumor that they didn't want to do that. So they were forced by the dean. So I stepped in and said, okay, so whoever doesn't want to be here, stay here with me in my corner. Who is excited about the training, go to the other corner. So we could see it.
Yes, excellent.
And then I asked them, okay, give me until the first break. If you then don't believe that it's any useful, feel free to leave.
Super.
And they came back.
Whoa, great. And that's a great option. That's andragogy in action. You've given them an option. You've treated them like adults. Yeah.
And I think, this treating like adults. And I think very often we're not doing it enough. And I recently had a case where I was hosting an online workshop for a large community. So not my own community, but a different community. So I was confronted with all these participants who had their microphones and their cameras off and hosting a session about engagement. I was like, okay, engagement 101. If you don't engage yourself, don't expect anyone else to engage. So yes, you can keep your camera and your microphone off, but we'll now go into breakouts. And if you log off because it's not for you, then maybe you don't want to engage your stakeholders.
No. You're very kind. I just said during lockdown, you must have your camera and your microphone on. That's it. I don't do cameras off. That's not happening. So you're very kind.
On the other hand, it's an entire different discussion, right? I do understand that some cannot put their cameras on for different reasons. And even if it's that they feel self-aware with their hair or makeup, or they don't want to be recorded because it's a large public session and nobody knows where the recording goes. But then at least put the camera on if you're in a breakout. For your peers when you're not recorded. I think you can do that.
It's like going into a networking experience with a bag in your head. We just wouldn't do that. You would not do that.
Yeah. According to you, what makes a workshop fail?
Back to the emotional intelligence, lack of self-awareness, which it can lead to complacency or arrogance. And I think that lack of self-awareness can make people rest on their laurels. So not get any better. I can do facilitation. I've done a 3-day course. I'm a facilitator. That's me. And then never go to anything else and never ask for feedback and never give themselves feedback. So I think lack of self-awareness, and everything I do is so entwined with the emotional intelligence, and that is the key quadrant.
And yes, I totally get that. And 2 things come to my mind. One is the differentiation between self-awareness and self-consciousness. So one is helpful because we question, but in a positive way. The other one, self-consciousness, is almost self-destructive. When do we flip? And how do you help someone to remain in the self-awareness area without getting into the self-conscious one?
As part of the program that I run, I train the facilitators to give feedback and ask for feedback. And it gets to the point where you can actually give yourself feedback. So we look very carefully at words, but also I was married to a police officer. He retired a couple of years ago. So it's evidential feedback. So it's nothing based on feelings or emotions. So I teach them a formula for feedback, and we practice it throughout the course. We practice it from day one of, okay, what did you see? What were the words? What were the behaviours? What was the impact? And so we use evidential feedback to give to each other all the time. We build it up, progressive development, skill practice, and then they get to the stage where they are able to do it themselves. So there is an avenue for that self-awareness and that feedback, which should not be self-conscious because it's evidential.
And self-conscious is just in our mind, so it's not evidential.
Right. Yeah.
That's a good distinction.
Mm-hmm.
And then how do we, because the self-awareness on our impact on others is also very context related. Right? You mentioned China.
Yes.
So if we host in China, we might not understand our impact because we don't know enough about the context. And then, especially in the online world, we don't know from where people are joining and what they're understanding, what their cultural norms are. So what is the role in self-awareness in this context of uncertainty of norms, rules?
I think it's back to the evidence thing. If you can evidence it, no matter what the culture is, you can then discuss it and dissect it. When you said this happened, the impact was this. What's that about then? What does that mean? And how is that different from other things or other contexts or other cultures? But there's also, because facilitation is so open, so when I've done things in China or Japan or Brunei or wherever I don't speak the language, it's open enough for me not to need to drill down to my understanding of it, as long as they have got a good understanding and we always set the norms, the protocols beforehand, and they're their protocols.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, in Brunei, every morning before we started the facilitation, we had to say a prayer, but it always had to be led by a man, couldn't be led by a woman. Now, I wouldn't have known that, but in setting up the protocols, they set that up, and I learned that from day one, and that just became the norm. So you use the experience, as you say, that's in the room. It's what facilitators do. You use it, you tap into it, they set the culture and the norm that is acceptable for them, and I learn about it.
And then I guess also creating the space where if we overstep or not aware of something, someone will let us know because they feel safe enough.
Yes, and interpreters are great. And using the same interpreters, I've got a fantastic interpreter I use in China, Sherry, and not only have I used her over there, but she's come over with groups. And once in Nottingham, I was working with a group of Chinese principals, and she kind of nudged me in the arm and she said, normally at this point you would do this, you haven't done it today, is there a reason for that? And I said, oh, I just forgot. So she was keeping me to my design. You would normally have done this and said that. Oh, okay. She pleased me.
So how is it to train andragogy in a culture that is clearly hierarchical?
Fascinating and a little bit frustrating, because once you leave, you're not quite sure what's going to happen. You've planted a seed, and that's all I can do. So
how open are the participants then, or how much is it just politeness to say, okay, we follow the training and then we cannot implement it anyway?
Oh gosh, so open, so willing to learn. This intrinsic motivation. There was a while after I'd finished teaching, about 2012, 2013, and started my own facilitation business, I thought, I don't want to work in the UK because teachers are exhausted. They are fed up. Their professional learning's all at the wrong time. I only want to work with people who really have the energy to learn. And that was China, and it was Japan. They are desperately keen learners. So the intrinsic motivation is there. They just want to learn and tell us more and tell us more and tell us more.
It's beautiful to hear. I worked in Vietnam, and I had the experience with the Vietnamese students who read the textbook already before I arrived to actually give the lecture, which was very intimidating. And it's good to hear that it apparently then doesn't stop.
Yes, and often in countries, Vietnam, I had a very similar experience in Vietnam. They value education differently.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure how much we value it here in the UK. Certainly in China, I can remember once in Shanghai, a professor at Shanghai Normal University told me, if you don't work, you die. If you don't get an education, you don't work, you die. So education is life or death. That's how.
Do they have a Teacher's Day in China as well?
I don't know.
In Vietnam, they have the Teacher's Day, so every teacher gets a little present, and
I think
they get
actually
honored.
they do. Yeah, now that I think about it, because I'm still in touch with a lot of my Chinese colleagues on WeChat, and I see things like that. So yes, I'm pretty certain that they do.
Yeah, which already says it all.
Yeah.
At the same time, also from my experience there, and in other cultures, like I've worked in Western Africa, and there the problem that I encountered was that it was difficult to see everyone at eye level. So I was the foreigner, so they wanted to show me respect. I was the foreigner coming to their country with an academic title. So although I tried to let them know that I have to and want to learn as much from them as they can learn from me, it was difficult to break this kind of cultural code. So what's a trick that you could apply to get the Andragogy mindset?
In every country I've been in, I challenge them to teach me their language. So I have my own flip, and every day we add a word or a phrase, and every day they test me. So I'm a learner like them. And in Brunei, so normally it would be Brunei and Malay, but also because we had the Ministry for Religious Affairs, they would also use Arabic. So I'm trying to learn Arabic and Brunei and Malay. And yeah, I've got all sorts of little bits of language in my head, but I can't actually speak fluently any language. So yeah, that was a level playing field. I'm a learner like you. And so I'll learn how to say stop in Chinese. I'll learn how to say sit down in Arabic. I'll learn how to say group number one. I'll say good morning, goodbye, have a nice weekend, all the rest of it. So level field, you might give me the title professor, which I'm not. And I know culturally you want to call me that. I'm also a learner like you. So help me to learn.
Beautiful. So you basically, you model the eye level.
Yeah.
And show your own fallibility.
Yeah, vulnerability and just how not very good British people are at learning languages.
Beautiful. What remains your number one facilitation challenge?
Contracting with clients. Yeah. I often get asked to go into schools or education authorities and they'll say, we have some teachers that need leadership development. And you're laughing because you know it's often not the teachers, it's often the people that have asked you in. So it's because their leadership has not been skilled enough with andragogy in mind that they might have challenges with the people they're trying to lead. So it's either that they project onto the people they're leading, or sometimes a little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing. You know, people will call me and say, I need a consensus workshop. And I think, okay, so we talk through and we plan through, and I'll say, I'm not sure that's exactly what you need. I think you might need this. No, I want a consensus workshop. So
where are they coming from?
They've seen it out there and they think that's what they want. They've heard the term. They've maybe seen the ICA course for consensus workshop and focus conversations. Oh, I read about that and that's what I want. Or I heard a facilitator talking about it. I heard somebody talking about it. They've been in one, they said it was great. That's what I want for my staff. Yeah, that's the biggest challenge. So I often end up facilitating that conversation.
I can imagine that you can then use your tool to open their mind and create this tension.
Yeah, absolutely. That's it. Because you think it's going to be quite easy and straightforward. They want you to do some work, you go in, and then it's not easy and straightforward. You think, okay, I'll have to revert back to, I haven't got a design here, but I know what design I'm going to use, so I'll just design this conversation now.
Yeah. Can you give us a glimpse into this framework? Because I think many in the audience can relate to that.
Yeah, so the design is based on the format and Andragogy. You can go and put this in your search engine and look for it. So the format design for experiential learning, which Kolb then expanded, and you can Google David Kolb. So it's based on that. So it's a little bit more than the why, what, how, and what if I do it. It's a bit more than that because adults, and here's the next clue, adults need time to reflect. So whenever you do something, you've also got to build in reflection time and reflection questions. So yes, there are 4 quadrants and 4 areas that you must pass through for deep and profound learning, but you also need a little bit of reflection at the end of each of those points too. So there you go, 4 quadrants and a wee of 3 or 4 reflections, and that's your design.
And would you then also sneak in the reflection for these difficult conversations with potential clients or leads?
Yes. I would just absolutely stick to that design because it's what I'm unconsciously competent in. So I do it without even thinking about it. And if I had to just quickly jot it down on paper, I would just draw my quadrants and put my questions round it, and that would be it. Yeah, and they would get the time to reflect and think about before we moved on to the next quadrant.
So you start with the what? No, the why.
Start with the why.
Start with the why, of course.
Yeah, because if you don't, so I need to know why before I even start learning. And if you don't get the whyers in the room, you've lost the room, because it is about 57% of your room.
Yeah.
Adults will want to know why first. It's the relevance, it's problem orientation. Why am I here? And if I don't know why I'm here, I'm not going to sit here. Although you will get some people who are quite happy just to come in. I have no idea why I'm here, but it's a day off work, so I'm just going to sit and let it all wash over me. But the majority of your room will want to know the why first.
And then in order to convince a client or to help them realize that what they need might be something else, you would then start with reflecting on why they want this, what they want, to then at the end come out of the conversation realizing that actually they might need something different?
Yeah, often. And sometimes, and this is worst case scenario, agreeing to what they want, but when I actually show up, doing something different. Yeah. And that was an emergency plan.
Did they realize?
So I'll tell you the story of that. A school who my teachers need leadership development. Okay. And I 3 or 4 contracting meetings trying to persuade that I don't know that they do. I'm not convinced that they do. What about this? What about that? No, they absolutely do. And I need you here on this day. Okay, so turned up and was faced with a room with their arms folded. They'd done a full day's work, arms folded. They were out for me. They didn't want to be there and they didn't want to listen to anything that I had to say. So we did a little bit of introductions and I said, I just have a feeling that this is not what you need right now. So I'm thinking we might just do some individual coaching one-on-one. So I'm going to put up a flip chart with times and just fill in your slot. And when you've done your bit, you can go home. And perfect. The head teacher did appear just at that point when I sent them out of the room and said, get a coffee while you're waiting for your slot. Oh, what's going on? What's going on? I said, I just had to say, this is not what they need. I did have an inkling that it wouldn't be what they needed, but I needed to meet them first. And this is more appropriate. And they're quite happy with this. And we'll do a 20-minute introduction to coaching. So,
and how did the head teacher react?
Once I'd explained it to him, he was fine. Never got to go back because, strangely enough, he was suspended. Yeah. Kind of says it all. Yeah. Not for me doing coaching with these staff, but for other things.
And I think it's a tricky thing to these leadership trainings, because I've heard it a couple of times, and it is misleading that if you invite your staff members for leadership training, that you are implying that their leadership skills lack.
Yeah.
And who wants to be a bad leader?
Exactly. Yeah. And often nowadays in schools, who even wants to be a leader? So really I don't do that anymore. I only offer my training program. Yeah. So one product, if you want this from me, buy it. If you want something else, not anymore. I don't do that anymore.
Yeah. And then there's a side products. They will increase their self-awareness and their empathy and their leadership.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's it. It's all about leadership. You learn to be a facilitator of adults, which is, when you apply it in your context, successful leadership.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
100%. And still leadership sounds so much nicer than facilitation. Andragogy.
Well, leadership, again, a huge big nominalization. What does it mean? Who even knows what leadership means? It comes from the verb to lead, a leader, to lead. But as soon as we put ship on the end, it's a whole pot of vagueness. And there's thousands of leadership theories out there, and yet we don't seem to be producing very good leaders.
Yeah, and the best leaders are sometimes the hidden leaders that don't wear the title.
Yeah, and I often think that about sports teams, their captains. They don't go on a captain's course to learn to be a good captain, and yet they're often fantastic leaders.
This is interesting. And do you think it's then is it the intrinsic motivation again, that those who are interested in being leaders, they will become good leaders? Or what is it that makes good lead? Because it's maybe a confirmation bias, or that those become captains in a sports team because they have these leadership skills.
They have the skills of leaders. So I believe the skills make a good leader. It's not about knowing about leadership. And I think I might have said this to you before. I know lots about Olympic gymnastics. I know all the disciplines. I know the science behind the moves. I know all the moves. It doesn't make me an Olympic gymnast. So it doesn't matter how much you know about leadership or theories. It's the skills that make you a leader. It's what you do and what you say.
Yeah, and how you show up, and without thinking about it. It's not that you want to flip your leader manual.
No, exactly.
Situation.
Yeah. We're 2-0 down. Let me just check my book. What should I say now? No, they know exactly what to say. They know exactly how to motivate people. There are bad leaders in sports teams as well, bad captains, but the good ones, it's what they do, it's what they say, it's how they show up, it's how they make other people feel. You know, I've had leaders that I would have run through a brick wall for, sports captains. It's, yeah.
Yeah. And then again, it comes back to what you said in the beginning. It's then to teach the underlying skills to maybe also, I think there are many leaders or those who have the potential because they do have the self-awareness, but maybe they don't dare yet.
Yeah.
Or they haven't fully polished the diamond.
Absolutely. And I do believe, and this is, again, Romy Alexander, if you truly design your learning based on experiential learning, skills learning is a quarter of it. And this is where a lot of leadership programs, leadership courses, they miss out that bit because the people taking them don't know how to dissect a skill and build it back up again. And that's why I think we have leaders that are not good leaders because they know the theory, they've read the books, but actually they haven't been taught the skills. It's quite hard to do that bit. And so most trainings and programs that I've been on, I've just missed it out and they've just jumped from the leadership theory and we've learned all this and we've read about all this. So how do you think you'll apply that in your context? Oh, I think I'll apply it with my staff in a staff meeting. Good, off you go, bye-bye. But actually, you haven't learned the skill of how to do it. Oh my goodness. Huge assumption has just been made that because you've read about it, you know how to do it.
Yeah, exactly. And the dissecting to then building it up again implies that you understand the context, because the elements of leadership, depending on the cultural context, your personal context, the personality type, might be very different, actually.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Perspective on leadership.
Yes.
Yeah. And we've been speaking for an hour.
My goodness, it's flown by.
Yes. Is there something that you would have wanted to share and that we haven't touched upon?
So this is the reflective question. Good point to put it in. And I am one of these reflective learners where I probably couldn't tell you that now, but I might be able to tell you tomorrow morning. So I'm also the most annoying person in your room.
Let's say that.
So not at the moment. I can't think of anything at the moment.
Beautiful. And I just want to thank you because you really opened up my horizon by learning about andragogy.
Excellent.
And a new perspective on leadership.
And so tying back into what Romy said, has there been anything that struck you? That's experiential learning.
Sorry, did you ask me a question?
Yeah, I mean, it's a rhetorical question, so you don't have to answer it in terms of what has struck you? And that was the phrase you used, experience your learning. What has struck you from this? Yeah. But again, it's rhetorical. We don't need to answer that.
And I think I answered it before, the concept of andragogy and the eye level, the humility that we bring into the room by assuming that everyone has knowledge already, and then starting with creating the curiosity and the need to learn, the want to learn.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Very welcome. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Nice to be able to talk about what you do.
Thank you for staying tuned and for listening until the very end. I hope that you found the inspiration and the wisdom that you are looking for. And I hope that you will subscribe to the show so that you never miss any of the interviews with another inspiring facilitator from across the world. I'm devoted to continue this podcast and to deliver weekly an episode that maintains the quality that you expect and you deserve. And if you would like to help me to maintain this quality and to keep the podcast free, please help us. Visit workshops.work/support to make a small donation to keep the podcast free. Thank you so much. I hope to be in your ears next week.